YouTube, welcome back. We got less than a week to go before the new 1.1 patch that's dropping on July 9th, and I'm super excited for it. So excited that I'm actually playing Last Epoch right now. I'm doing something and I'm experimenting with a character that I've always wanted to play, but Last Epoch and EHG have decided that there's no good reason to play it. So instead, I'm just forcing it. You know that I like Rive. I played a lot of Rive in the past. It's actually one of the very first skills that I played in Last Epoch, but I hated it when I played it initially, and I've come full circle. Half circle. 180. I love Rive. It's very, very fun to play. Recently, I put up a YouTube video talking about Anvil Rive. It's a build that was a Void Knight. It had lots and lots of damage, and then we trimmed some of that damage and took Anvil stance. And that allowed us to get extra tankiness to go along with our Sentinels, to go along with our two-handed axe and our Titan Heart. Titan Heart is a unique body armor that gives you 50% DR against everything, which is just a wonderful thing to have because, by the numbers, Sentinel is one of the squishiest classes in the game. If you doubt me, take a look at the description. I have, in the past, run a number on the major archetypes in all of Last Epoch. This was before 1.0, but in a broad sense, it demonstrates what kinds of things you might look for when it comes to effective HP in Last Epoch. So, that brings us to this build. For the interesting part first, let's talk about void damage. For the sad part, and going forward into patch 1.1, we'll talk about that after. You can always reference the YouTube timestamps if you want to jump around. So for the interesting parts about this, let's talk about void damage. So I would love to have all of my damage pointing in the same direction. Unfortunately, EHG has said that they don't want that. I actually asked them about it. So Rive has this physical, melee, area, strength, the 4 scaling tags on this. And what that means, if you have an axe, the implicit says 101 melee damage on my axe. And it's untyped melee damage. In the past, I would have called this adaptive damage. And this damage adapts, or is typed to whatever the skill is. So that 101 damage becomes physical damage on Rive. So the meta way of playing Rive, which is the way that I played it when I played that Anvil Rive build that I just mentioned a moment ago, is making use of this absolutely absurd node called Flamedrinker's Blade. And this gives you 2,000, 3,000% physical penetration, which is absurd. So what do? You build a bunch of physical damage, you skip all the void stuff, you skip the void melee damage on Void Knight, you skip Void Shred, you skip percent void damage, you skip the movement speed node, you skip the melee or the void, you skip all the void stuff because Rive has one node here that's completely insane. So I've always wanted, there's so much physical damage. Would it really hurt if Rive had a node that you would only take as a Void Knight that only gave you percent more void damage? What if it also gave you the void tag so that it would convert the untyped adaptive damage on the implicit of your weapon? So here we are. EHG has said no. Technically, EHG has said we're interested in, at some point in the future, releasing a unique item that puts the void tag on Rive. I'm excited. I'm worried that they're going to make it a weapon, but I'm still excited for that future. In the meantime, because I'm waiting for patch 1.1, I've been trying out this. I've been thinking to myself, what if I just put as much flat melee void damage on my skill as possible, and I'll just pretend like there's a void tag, and I'll scale it with all void stuff. So this is where it has gotten us up to. The clip at the beginning of this was 2 things against tier 4 Julra. One was with a bunch of HP idols, getting us all the way to 4,600 HP, and the other was with 4 times DPS idols, these 2x2s, with melee damage when a skill echoes, and then armor shred is a suffix there. So they're pretty good idols. You could do better, but I think there's a good swap in to show you how much life or how much damage you can gain for giving up 1,100 life with all of my double HP idols that I swapped out in the clips at the beginning of this YouTube video here. So for Rive, what do you get for being void damage? Well, for being a VK, you get a ton because this node's insane. And this node gives you double echo chance, giving you up to 80% echo chance, which is just so good. For being void damage, our payoff is that we get to make use of the flat void that we get per vitality when wielding an axe. And of course, we're using an axe here. We also get 10% more. We get 75% increase from our passive. We get the access to these nodes, which is a bit of extra void damage here. We could take the movement speed node if we opted into it. We get better leech with the World Eater node in our passive. In our skills and anomaly, we get double or better leech off the Time Eater node. And we also get access to Void Shred, which is built into our character because the bubble, when we're nearby an enemy, applies like 2 stacks of Void Shred every 1 second. Something thereabouts. It's written on the skill. We also get access to not only the 10% more damage in Rive, but Volatile Reversal. Sometime around the 1.0 patch, I think it might have been 0.92, they added in this Food for Worms node, which gives you 4 times 12 is 48. God, I hope so. 48% more void damage, and it only applies to void. A buff that this build might get in the future is, what if this node worked? It's notable that the Time Rot chance that Time Legion applies, it doesn't apply Time Rot, doesn't do anything for some reason. So the only Time Rot chance that we have in this particular build comes from Abyssal Echoes, comes from this node called Abyssal Tendrils. So that's the rough outline of what this build looks like. You could use Void Cleave as a traversal skill. You could even use Healing Hands as a traversal skill. But basically I'm using Healing Hands just because it's a thing that does damage. That's about it. So we don't have the Void Tag on Rive. We don't have the Void Tag on Healing Hands. We have about 196 flat void damage and 101 untyped damage, which is physical. So napkin math, we have 2 to 1. It's like we have 200-ish flat void damage. We have 100-ish flat physical damage. And of course, for Healing Hands, that becomes flat fire damage because it has the fire tag on this little sub skill over here. So that's what the build looks like. I thought this build was going to be kind of garbage. I thought it was going to be a meme, but the damage turned out pretty well. Like, my gear's fine. I have tier 7 crit on my axe, which is, I would call a starting point because it's not that hard to get. You just kind of grind it out. But Apathy's Maw with tier 7 crit is something that you can use in a wide variety of builds, and we made this, so it feels great. A Titan Heart with as many plus levels to Rive as possible, and then a couple pieces of like vitality, movement speed, some health. Like, my gear's good. I like it. I'm not going to pretend like my gear's not good, but what we notably do not have is we don't have anything that's percent increased damage when your skills echo. So we have 80% echo chance. We could get more damage off this build. We could sacrifice our double HP idols and instead put in these DPS idols down here. We could, instead of what I'm looking for, I would like a Titan Heart with vitality and Rive on it. But you could get even more damage with like plus levels to Rive and then percent increased damage when your skills echo. You could go for that instead. You could drop the Titan Heart and then use the body armor type that even as an implicit modifier has, you know, percent increased damage when your skills echo. You could do the same thing here. You could drop the base type and go for a crit multi base type or the echo base type. You can get even more damage off your helmet, but take a look at what we have. It's 4,600 HP. The beginning of this video, we talked about 2 major things. That was the void damage build without having the void damage tag. And then we talked about something that's coming in patch 1.1, which is questionable. And that questionable thing is the change to Hammer and Anvil stance on the Forge Guard skill tree. So I suspect that this was a good change. For those of you who don't know, you can currently take advantage of this in patch 1.0, and you take this, you stay in Anvil stance, and you never use Hammer stance. And that gives you damage reduction all the time, and you sacrifice some damage because of it. 25% damage. 25%? 25% damage. I've technically seen people make use of this by actually toggling it sometimes, but we're not going to talk about that. If you want to push corruption, you need defense. You need to not instantly die, especially if you're playing a melee character. You need to walk up to the monsters and then walk up to the next monsters that are throwing axes at you. And having some extra tankiness is what allows you to do that. So our tankiness in Sentinel comes from this node here, which is 10% DR. And then it also comes from so when we talk about Sentinels, we say that, like, from a defensive perspective, they have a very high floor, but they also have a relatively low ceiling. It's easy to get a Sentinel as a brand new player up and running, and it's easy to make them feel good. You have access to lots of resistances and a tiny bit of armor. You've got a strength node and a vitality node that you're probably speccing into on every single character that you play as a Sentinel. Like, you're going to feel good. But after you play other builds, after you take your Sentinel and you go to high corruption, after you compare what defensive tools a Sentinel has compared to every other class in the game, every other master in the game, you realize that you don't really have much. You can use a shield, EHG would tell you. You can use a shield, and there's block chance nodes. The issue with saying you can use a shield is that other classes can use a shield too. You could use a Weaver's Will shield, which works really well with dodge. It even works well with Falconer. You could use the endurance stacking shield, and you can cap your block chance. You could even use a Bastion of Honor and have some strength and have some maximum block chance against nearby enemies. That last one's fallen out of favor because it got triple nerfed, but it is a thing that you could do. You could be a block build, and it takes a lot of investment to be a block build, even as a Sentinel. You're sacrificing a lot to get that all set up. And what if I want to be two-handed? What if I want to play melee? What if you want to dual wield? Don't even get me started on dual wield. Holy moly, you get even less defensive options compared to what you have here. My point is, in 1.0, you had an option of getting an additional source of DR in your build. If you got enough damage, you could trim some damage and turn that damage into DR. And that's cool. That's interesting. It took a lot of skill points to get into it, which kind of felt like you were getting punished because there weren't particularly good points to get up to that point, but it's at least an option that you had. Forge Guard is getting changed in the 1.1 patch. It's getting some extra love, and one of those pieces of love is to delete Hammer and Anvil stance and change it into like a minion node that gives you minion attack speed and armor shred, if memory serves me right. So what's the point of this? The point is, if you're interested in playing melee Sentinel builds, or any Sentinel builds, but particularly melee, because we need to walk up to enemies, we need to ask ourselves, like, where are we actually getting our damage reduction from? We can get some unique items that, you know, things like Titan Heart, if you're playing a two-handed melee build. But if you're not playing two-handed melee, are you using a shield? Are you dual wielding? Dual wield Sentinel, believe it or not, is one of the lowest effective HP builds in the entire game. The only thing lower than that is like a mage that doesn't have Flame Ward up, and also doesn't have anything else up. Yeah, I think that's it. I think a mage with none of their temporary defensive bonuses is squishier than a Sentinel. But a mage, as you know, also has access to tons of temporary buffs, including Flame Ward, which is one of the best defensive abilities in the game. So what does this mean? It means that if you're opting into more damage, if you're trying to get, you know, damage when echo on your helmet, damage when echo on your body armor, a bunch of DPS idols here, or even the 4x1, the long idols that give you, you know, crit multi when using Rive, those are all good things. The 4x1s are hard to fit in because you can only fit 2 of them, and then you can't use like many other idols along with them. But they all, every single one of them has an opportunity cost. And I think the opportunity cost that you're paying for this is just too high. So 4,600 HP, it feels good. You know, I'm killing monsters. My damage is fine. My gear is pretty good too. But, you know, not having access to Hammer and Anvil stands, I think is a good thing to discuss. We've been chatting about this live on twitch.tv. Mind me for a second. I'm going to pan over and see if there's anything that they'd like to talk about as well. Can we have mercy on the Sentinel mains and not mention Forge Guard for the next 4 months, please, Pepe Hands? All right, listen. I don't know. Is it that bad? We don't know how bad it is. At face value, we're losing one of the very few defensive tools that we have access to as a Sentinel. I don't know how bad it is, but it kind of sort of looks bad. We'll see. Imagine if we ever address the fact that Primalist is basically held together by the Beastmaster tax. Another wonderful topic of conversation. The next time that we play some kind of Primalist build, maybe even before patch 1.1 drops, we'll discuss that as well. So in any case, this build performed better than I thought it was going to. I love having over 4,000 life. It feels so thick, even though it's not really numerically that thick. It just feels kind of thick. Is this build going to have enough offense and defense when it comes to the brand new Pinnacle boss being introduced in patch 1.1? I can't wait to find out, because 1.1 sounds awesome. I'll see you then.